Right, thank you very much and good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure for the International Labour Organization to participate in the World Investment Conference here in Istanbul. It's the second time that we participate. Last year I was also there in Milan. But it's the first time that we have the opportunity actually to participate in a workshop specifically on sustainable development goals and making, as says the title, investment promotion the engine for decent job creation. And now I'm just going to see whether it is indeed as easy. Yes. So already my colleagues from UNCTAD and from UNIDO showed you this slide with the Sustainable Development Goals. And decent work, which in a way is the mandate of the International Labour Organization, is not only a specific goal in the Sustainable Development Goals, as you can see goal number 8, where it talks about inclusive economic growth, productive employment, and decent work. But decent work is also for the very first time identified by the international community as a way to achieving all of the other Sustainable Development Goals. It is only through decent work and employment opportunities that allow families to move out of poverty that you can actually move to inclusive growth and sustainable development. So this is a very important component of the Sustainable Development Goals. And as I said, at the one hand, yes, you have this goal number 8, which is identified in the Sustainable Development Goals, but also the Addis Ababa agenda last year on the financing for development specifically identified foreign direct investment, FDI, are vital components to national development efforts. And this is a direct quote from that outcome document of Addis Ababa. And also, and that is another important component, it identifies the role of the private sector and how important it is to closer align private sector actions, policies, and practices with national development priorities and public goals, and the need for governments to put in place frameworks, institutional frameworks, that actually steer the private sector towards sustainable practices and foster long-term investment. And I think these are extremely important conclusions that were adopted by the international community for investment promotion agencies as you, being the link between, at the one hand, national governments and investment policies, and at the other hand, investors coming into your country. So, let me talk about decent jobs, how it is actually globally a top priority. And you just need to look at some of the figures. 670 million jobs need to be created to allow people to actually have a decent income, and specifically looking at youth. And that is the age group between 17 and 25. 71 million jobless youth, women and men. Moreover, 1 in 2 jobs is casual work, so not providing for long-term income for families, or is it unpaid work. And 1 in 4 workers support their family on less than $2 a day. So what we are talking about is the huge inequality that is currently in the world between countries and within countries, and that is obviously not moving towards inclusive economic growth and sustainable development. And so we see an enormous increase in a push for more shared benefits of globalization. And I was actually speaking last week at the WTO forum in Geneva. And the first remark that I made was actually how interesting it is that all these new terminologies come up. We talk about inclusive trade, we talk about sustainable investment, responsible supply chains, in a way indicating that the current practices are neither inclusive, sustainable, and responsible. And if we actually want to come to these sustainable development goals that have been adopted by all of the member states of the UN, something has to change in the system. And I think everyone agrees, the only question is how to actually do it and how the different partners have their role to play in getting there. And here, this is just a slide that just came out of the ILO's World Economic and Social Outlook, just looking at the areas around the world where young people aged 15 to 24 are unable to find work. And the dark areas are those where, of course, the situation is most difficult. And it's not only, as often is the case, said it's in Africa, but also you can find it in Europe. Spain, for example, is also very dark. Latin America, and also parts of Asia Pacific. This is one. And the second one is the difference between young women and men. So for young women, it's even more difficult to actually find a job. Again, when you look at specific parts in the world, it is more difficult for women to get into a labor market and to actually find jobs that provide them with a decent income and provide them with opportunities for productive employment. Now, why are we talking about this? And who, what is the International Labour Organization? Because you might feel we are, some people think we are like the global trade union movement or something, but we are a specialized agency of the United Nations. We were actually set up in 1919, so we're one of the oldest specialized agencies of the UN. We have 187 member states, and so all of the countries that you come from, you're all members of the International Labour Organization. We are the only tripartite organization in the UN, meaning that all of the work that we do is done by governments, but also by representative employers' organizations and representative workers' organizations from those 187 member states. And our mandate globally is decent work and social justice. We have our headquarters is in Geneva, and I'm based in Geneva, but we have many offices around the world, and I think a number of you either work with our offices or are definitely familiar with our offices. Now, specifically on trade or investment, because as you can see from the previous slide, the ILO basically deals with labor markets, employment policies, labor standards, which are actually the basis of labor laws and social dialogue institutions in many countries. But we also have a very specific instrument that is related to investment and operations of multinational enterprises. And so it's this ILO tripartite declaration, because it was adopted by governments, employers, and workers from around the world. It's a declaration of principles concerning multinational enterprises and social policy. As I said, it's the ILO instrument to work on investment, trade, but also to work on corporate social responsibility, because it has recommendations to governments and recommendations directly to investors, enterprises, on contributing to inclusive growth. The aim of this instrument is indeed to encourage the positive contribution of multinationals to socio-economic development and mitigate and resolve any negative impacts that their operations might lead to in the host country. As I said, the recommendations address not only to companies, but also to governments, because governments have a critical role to play in setting up the legal framework and the right policy framework for making sure that this contribution happens in the best positive way. And as I said, this is an instrument endorsed by our 187 member states. So some of these challenges that are basically addressed in the M&E declaration is, and we already touched upon that in the presentations by my previous colleagues, is how do you come to those shared benefits? As I said, where everyone is now looking for shared benefits, how to ensure that foreign direct investment contribute to more and better jobs, decent work in the country of operations. Secondly, inclusive growth. How to encourage the positive contribution of multinationals to socio-economic development and minimize and resolve any negative impact in the country of operation. Thirdly, what is needed in terms of policy coherence? Because a lot of the issues that, of course, we face is because there is a lack of policy coherence in terms of government policies, but also in terms of closer aligning public action or public policies with the way multinationals operate, or rather the other way around, how to make sure that multinational, their policies and practices are closer aligned and actually contribute to national development priorities. And then, of course, the whole area of sustainable enterprise development, which is a major topic that the ILO works on. And sustainable enterprises are enterprises that do not only create economic growth, but that also contribute to decent work and taking into account environmental considerations, which was very much highlighted also by my colleague from UNIDO this morning. So this all means this is a key element and a key instrument when you talk about sustainable development goals and financing for development. It has these 5 chapters, and of course, as you can see, employment and training are 2 of the very important chapters in this declaration. In addition to conditions of work and life, which talks about wages, occupational safety and health, and other items, as well as industrial relations, which is freedom of association and collective bargaining. I'm not going to go into detail of all of those recommendations, but I will leave them on the table for you outside if you're interested. Now, in terms of job creation, as part of the follow-up mechanism to this ILO instrument, we actually do every year a survey to our member states, so to the ministries of labor, to the employers' organization, and to the trade union, in terms of what are the most important chapters in this M&E declaration. And you will see we've just completed, we've done the Americas, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, and Asia and the Pacific will be coming out very soon. The top issue in all of these is, at the one hand, employment creation, training opportunities, and linkages with national enterprises. And that was also already brought to the discussion by my colleague from UNIDO. So we are talking here about the quantity and the quality of employment, both direct job creation, indirect job creation, and also induced. And when you talk about induced employment, you talk about the much broader local economic development that is linked to operations of multinational enterprises and foreign direct investment. And when you come to that element, then you move towards inclusive growth. And these is just the different graphs that we have in our regional reports. And I just have 2 copies here, but you will see at the end of the presentation, you find all of the links where you can find this. But in all of them, and now I need to see how does the light, yeah. So in all of them, the ones on top is everything related to employment. So you see for the Americas, for Africa, and for Asia Pacific. For all of them, these are really the top issues that come out. But together also with training, and as well, of course, as everything that is related to quality of employment. But they are the top issues coming about. So then, because this is a workshop, so instead of just me talking, I want you to think about a number of elements. So I've put forward a couple of questions that as IPAs, I think it is also important to think about. And so do increased FDI flows automatically lead to job creation in your country? Secondly, does FDI automatically lead to quality jobs and decent work in your country? And what in a way is needed to closer align investment facilitation at the one hand, so talking about getting more investment into the country, but closer aligning that with national development goals, of which, as I pointed out, job creation and decent job creation is a top priority in most of the countries around the world. And then when we start looking in a number of areas, then we can start looking into what are the incentives that are actually offered to many of the foreign investors in terms, for example, of bringing in outside staff, what are requirements in terms of local skills development that many of the foreign companies have, incentives, and although this is not a mandate of the ILO, but it is very closely linked, is actually the incentives given in terms of tax, because at the one hand, a lot of investors are asking for a well-skilled workforce, SMEs that are fully operational, that they can make the linkages to. But at the other hand, how do governments basically have resources to train, to give an education to their young women and men in their countries, to make sure that they have the right skills when the investors come in, and have indeed SMEs that are formal. I mean, I'm not even talking here about the informal economy, but that are formal, that live up to labor standards, environmental standards, that many companies actually have in their either supplier codes or code of conduct and are expecting from the local SMEs to comply with. And in a way, we start talking about what is the balance of power between, at the one hand, governments looking to attract foreign direct investment and some of the potential investors, and the way that the negotiations happen at the moment when investors come into the country. And what is also the whole issue of national policy coherence, where you see at the one hand economic decision-making and attracting a lot of investment, and on the other hand, ministries of labor developing employment policies, looking for skills development, and so on, but that there is not a real policy coherence in making sure that this is either a core element when you attract investment, or making sure that investment then contributes to this employment policy. So when we look again at some of the recommendations of these international policy instruments, and I'm just quoting from the ILO instrument, here it says, governments should carefully study the impact of multinational enterprises on employment in different industrial sectors. Governments as well as MNEs in all countries should take suitable measures to deal with the employment and labor market impacts of the operations of multinational enterprises. So that's a specific paragraph that comes out of our declaration. And I think there are three moments when you can actually start looking at those impacts of MNEs on the labor market. The first one is when entry of the MNE is negotiated. So in a way, what are the incentives that are given to the MNE? And secondly, what is incorporated in the obligations when the investor comes in? Secondly, once the MNE is operational in the host country, we see that many governments, especially in developing countries, where a lot of the obligations actually are not in the investment agreement, they come back via CSR policies to stimulate responsible behavior by enterprises, including, for example, hiring of local staff, linkages with national enterprises, because all of that somehow was not in the original agreement with the MNE. And so the governments are then trying to get back to the MNEs in saying it would be good if you're a responsible company that you start hiring local staff, you contribute to vocational skills training, and so on. And a number of companies indeed do this, and I think it was already pointed out before, because they also see that it's good for business to actually be a good citizen in the host country, and so indeed they participate in, for example, I would say in vocational skills training programs of the government, and so on. So, but again, it is more voluntary approach, because in the beginning it wasn't actually there, and some of the work that we do in Mozambique was very much related to that problem. And then, of course, the third moment is when an MNE stops operations in a country and it delocalizes to another country for many different reasons, but labor cost sometimes is one of the reasons why MNEs delocalize. But how do you make sure that this is done in a way that is not too harmful for the local workforce? And there are some really interesting case studies that have been put forward of how do you make sure from the beginning that there are sufficient benefits of the MNE for the local economy, so that when the MNE decides to delocalize, that actually during that period a whole new sector has been developed, so that when the MNE decides to delocalize, it's actually not a problem but it is actually, in the meantime, the host country has been able to develop a whole sector by transfer of skills, technology, and so on. So there are, in a way, three important processes I think that we can look at is how to measure and monitor the impact of M&Es in the host country, especially in terms, as we say, decent work. Specifically, public-private dialogue opportunities to closer align those operations with national development priorities. And I think a number of IPAs actually do this, as you call, aftercare, I think. And I'm not all that familiar with the terminology that is being used in the IPAs. And then, of course, the enabling policy environment that is needed to enhance inclusive growth and decent job creation through, as I said, policy coherence between economic and social, active labor market policies, SME policies, training, vocational training policies, and so on. Now, these recommendations, of course, are from the ILO. As I said, we have a mandate on decent work. We usually deal with ministries of labor, but our recommendations also can be found in other instruments from other organizations. And this morning, UNCTAD didn't mention so much the investment policy framework for sustainable development, which is a very important policy framework adopted by UNCTAD, also in the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, where a whole area on labor is actually included, and that refers back to the ILO standards and the M&E Declaration. And I also would like to reference here the guidelines of the International Chamber of Commerce, the guidelines for international investment, and specifically their labor chapter, where it has recommendations for investors, for government of home countries, and governments of host countries, where again they reference all of the ILO standards. So we are not, I would say, an organization that only deals with labor and employment, but our standards are also taken over by a lot of other organizations that specifically deal with investment. Now, the kind of support that we give to our ILO member states on the basis of the M&E Declaration are, for example, capacity building and policy assistance at the country level. And I don't know whether Côte d'Ivoire is present here, but we've done a lot of work on youth employment in Côte d'Ivoire, not only with the Ministry of Labor, but because it is such an important national development priority. Now also the Ministry of Commerce has asked us to actually facilitate dialogues with new investors coming in to make sure that from the beginning, youth employment creation and links to national enterprises is very much there from the beginning. So we are providing that kind of support to government. We do tripartite plus dialogue facilitation on decent work priorities, where again, it's not limited to Ministry of Labor, but we also reach out to Ministries of Mines, Ministry of Economic Development, and other ministries. But again, where we bring together, in a way, at the one hand, these ministries together with multinational enterprises, national employers organization, and national trade unions, precisely because of the linkages at the one hand, because many of the local enterprises are looking for these linkages, but also with the unions to see how decent work opportunities can actually be created. And we did this kind of dialogues, for example, in Zambia on the mining sector, where we also invited the ambassadors of the home countries of these multinational enterprises to really get a very fruitful dialogue happening on how this specific sector could better contribute to inclusive growth and sustainable development in Zambia. We do trainings on business and decent work. We are also working on developing a methodology to measure the impact of FDI and M&Es on decent work. And earlier this week, actually, we had in Mexico a workshop, a methodology, where we are working together with the Ministry of Labor and the National Statistical Office in Mexico. And we had a validation workshop earlier this week, where also ProMexico participated, because I know a lot of the IP measurement of impact, but it's not specifically focusing in on decent work as much as we are doing with this methodology. In terms of national policy coherence, this closer aligning economic and social policy decision making is a lot of the work that we do in many of the member states. And then in terms of international policy coherence, we have partnerships with UNCTAD, and I already mentioned this investment policy framework. And also we will be signing tomorrow this cooperation agreement with WIPA, specifically as WIPA is going into this direction of wanting to move towards sustainable investment in the context of the SDGs, and this is obviously a very important opportunity. Last year we had for the very first time a joint training with WIPA in our training center in Turin, specifically on investment facilitation and sustainable development, and maybe some of you participated in that training, but we will be doing it again next year because it was considered to be a very successful training. Now also for IPAs, and I'm using here some of the information from UNCTAD, and specifically the survey that was done by Paul's unit, it also shows that 75% of IPAs actually rank job creation as their primary or secondary objective, followed by technology transfer, export promotion, local linkages. I think the linkages with the SMEs are there as well, and domestic value added, and the development of skills. So in a way, our agendas are very closely aligned. So it provides an excellent opportunity to work together. And I leave you with a couple of questions that you might think about before we open the floor for specific questions. But that is indeed job creation a priority in your country's investment promotion or investment policy and FDI attraction? And what about the quality of the jobs? What is your experience in attracting FDI for more and better jobs? And what do you identify as some of the challenges and barriers to actually get there? If everyone is saying it's so important, then why is it not happening in many countries around the world? Is it due to a lack of interest of the investor? Or is it the lack of their real commitment to economic and social development in the host country? And is it that why there are these packages of incentives that are offered that actually limit, in a way, their contribution to socioeconomic development and job creation? Are you having some difficulties to actually measure the social impact of foreign direct investment? And if yes, I mean, what would be needed as for you to be able to do that better and start, would say, a policy discussion at the national level, not only with the ministries, maybe where you directly report to, but also to a number of other ministries. And I must say, when Paul put up the slide on IPAs having to reach out to other ministries, I saw there was one important ministry missing in that slide. And I have to say, the Ministry of Labour was not there, and I think it is a key partner for you if you say that employment creation is so important. So I would recommend you add that to the slides, in addition to the ministry dealing with health and the ministry dealing with the environment, because social is very much the Ministry of Labour dealing with that, or the Ministry of Employment. I mean, you have different names for those ministries. And is it also some challenges in terms of a lack of policy coherence? And then some final question before I leave you. So how can ILO and WIPA actually support your IPA to attract FDI for more and better jobs? And we have been, as part of our cooperation agreement, obviously discussing a number of concrete ideas that we want to further develop. Obviously capacity building on specifically SDG 8 and other decent work related SDGs, measurement and monitoring tools, specifically on decent work, this national dialogue facilitation, social key performance indicators that could be developed, a resource kit, I think, with positive case studies. And as I said, there are a number of really good case studies that would be very beneficial, I think, for a number of IPAs in definitely developing countries. and LDCs that are struggling with a number of those issues. Joint activities and exchange of experience at the international, regional, and national level. And this is just a final slide where you can find more information about the kind of work that we do, as well as the upcoming WIPO ILO training on effective investment facilitation and sustainable development next year in March in Turin. Thank you very much. Silence.
Thank you, Githa, for your nice speech. I just, after your last slide, when I saw your last slide, I took a notice about how WIPA and ILO can support IPAs to attract foreign direct investment. This is a very important point to me because we are invited once or twice a year, and we come together. Then after 2 days, everybody goes back to their countries or their home. There must be special concern about this WIPA and ILO or another international organizations. I think we need more. We need more cooperation. We may have meetings in any country or in any region. We can have workshops for a few days. We have to set up some projects and follow. These kind of works, I think, will benefit more us and also yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It has been an excellent presentation. I was involved at my capacity as Director of Labor from Bangladesh to engage with the ILO. So my first observation is I can clearly see the shift that ILO's activity has been making towards social priorities of the developing countries. So that's a positive development. And I'll be focusing on two aspects. One is your focus on M&Es. You see, if we have to achieve our social goals, we have to have similar or equally important focus on non-M&E enterprises in Bangladesh, in all developing countries. And I can see the importance of that in the case of Bangladesh, because whatever improvements in the last few decades has happened, in fact happened in the non-M&E areas. Mm-hmm. And that has been, ILO has been very instrumental in that area. Definitely the commitment of the government is the factor. And the second area is skill development. You see, if you look at the developing countries, some of the major constraints are easing up. For example, in energy and power, in Bangladesh, for example. So we have almost dealt with that issue. So what is the most important issue is skill. We are having difficulties. We are spending billions of dollars of foreign workers in our country. And similar thing is happening everywhere. But unfortunately, I don't see much work in that area. I mean, how much skill shortage is there in the world? It's not only in the United States, it's everywhere. And more so in developing countries. And already it's a constraint, and this constraint will be more and more felt in the years to come. So I would like ILO to be engaged more in skill development areas. If you look at decency of work and sustainable development goal or whatever, it's somehow linked there. And we cannot promote investment. Whoever comes to Bangladesh, for that matter, any developing countries will be asking this question: who are the people that would be working with us you know. So this is an area that you need to focus. Another area is development of entrepreneurs, because when the FDI comes to a country, they would like to have people who would be tying up with them, working with them. There also I can clearly see a huge deficit all around the world, more so in Bangladesh. So I'd like to see lots of ILO focus in those areas. Otherwise, you know, FDI will suffer, and so will suffer the economies in development of developing countries. Thank you so much. Thank you once again for your excellent presentation.
Thank you. Well, if I may just respond to your comment, I think you touched upon two very important elements, and that's indeed vocational skills training. I mean, it goes with, first of all, basic education. Secondly, vocational skills training is vital. And I've focused my presentation more on M&Es and on FDI, because that is obviously the topic of this conference. But a lot of the work that we do indeed is on skills development in many countries around the world, and entrepreneurship development, SME development. And for that, we even team up, I think, sometimes with UNIDO as well, on value chain development and many other elements. But I agree with you, it is critical that the quality also of the local enterprise, means, yes, you stimulate entrepreneurship, one thing, but also then the quality of the SMEs and their technical and productivity have to be up to the level to also make then the linkages with some of the foreign companies. And I think that is a really big challenge that in many countries it is not there. But that also requires investment. And the investment can come from the government, that obviously need to have the resources to be able to invest in such development. And also could come from the investor, you know, from the M&E, in making sure that actually skilling is part of the commitment that they make when they come into a country. So not just expecting that everything will be there, but also as part of their commitment to socio-economic development and inclusive growth, what is it that they can do? And there are a lot of examples of multinationals providing skilling programs, not only from their directly hired staff, but also with a number of the SMEs that they are engaging with. So we see all of these developments, but they are critical, as you say, to bring up everyone up to that level.
Thank you very much. My name is Boma Donatus. I'm from the Investment Promotion Agency of Cameroon. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I just want to draw your attention to the synergy that works between our ministries of labor, which most of our African countries have, with the IPAs. The linkage in between the government institution, which is the Ministry of Labor, at times with the IPA is not a really functional one. So it makes it in such a way that while the IPA is negotiating what is negotiating, maybe at times it totally occurs the whole aspect of the labor, you know, skills, or the labor concerns that have to do, or the job creation concerns that have to do with, in fact, the particular project that is involved in. What I mean is that I start seeing a very, very important component of the Ministry of Labor within the IPA as, you know, a guarantor of the whole process of making sure that the sustainable investment or whatever it's trying to negotiate, you know, comes on the table with all the other recommendations in terms of decent job creation and every single thing. And there comes my question. Can we link directly with the ILO? Do we have a possibility? Is some of the things you are offering, are they demand driven? Can an IPA get directly in touch with the ILO to ask for specific interventions in specific areas, or you must have to go through, most probably, your Ministry of Labor? Because, I mean, if you're coming from an African country like mine, it will be, they will say, but why do you have to go through directly to the ILO without going through us? That's one of the questions that I want to know. The second component that I want to know is, is related to the new work that the ILO is doing. And seeing what the ILO is doing is very, very informative. But I want to just say, is it occurring to the ILO now, or is it occurring to the ILO, the importance of the work that you are doing? Why is it taking center stage now at the ILO? Why was it not in the past? Because these things have been happening. Contracts have been negotiated with countries, or investors have been investing in most of these countries. Why is it like something that is coming new when this association was created so long a time ago? And it's like an awakening. I don't know whether it's WIPA, which is awakening this, or it's UNTAC, which is awakening this, or why this new sort of exuberance on the particular fact of, trying to see what is happening with SMEs, with IPS. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it's some work that was being done a long time ago. But I would like you to shed some lights and some thoughts on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will quickly respond to both questions, and thank you very much for those questions. I mean, the ministries of labor are not our ministries. Huh? I mean, we as ILO, it's all member states. We have 187 member states, and we primarily engage with, of course, ministries of labor, employment, and social affairs. But a lot of the country level work that we do go beyond those ministries, precisely because when you talk about decent work, it's not only one ministry that is actually responsible, but many others in creating that, policy coherence that we need at the national level. So if you say if now an IPA can come directly to the ILO, I think once we've signed that cooperation agreement, I think the most productive way would be to go through WIPA, link up with the ILO, and then we can see at the country level, because we have in every country what we call decent work country programs. And in each country, it identifies what are the specific priorities that the ILO will provide technical support to. And if, as part of that technical support, there are indeed opportunities, as for example, I said in Mexico, where ProMexico participated in that workshop. So if there are activities that allow us to further engage also with IPAs, that would be wonderful, I think. And secondly, it is the joint activities that we will be developing with WIPA, like the capacity building workshop next year in Turin. So I think there are various ways of engaging. And secondly, ILO becoming active on this issue. Actually, we've been active in all of that for quite a while, maybe not that maybe we're more known for our international labor standards and labor law and social dialogue around the world. But this instrument on multinationals was already adopted in the 1970s. But of course, it has gained increased importance now in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, because it is there that for the first time, all of these elements really come together, and where investment is identified as a key engine to bring about all of these sustainable development goals. So it also means for us as ILO that it is important to reach out to the investment community, and partly we do this through our collaboration with UNCTAD. But obviously it is also the collaboration with WIPA, which is therefore very important for us. And again, as I said, it's a national, in many countries, it's a national development priority. So it's really bringing those different elements together. So thank you again for your really interesting questions as well. And I'm available for any further questions you may have. Thank you.